Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm Linda Dixon from the Lexington Veterans Association, and I welcome you to a presentation on Milestones, Mishaps, and Management, the story of Antarctic aviation. We also welcome our fellow veterans who are viewing this program from the Edith Norse Rogers Memorial Veterans Hospital in Bedford, Massachusetts. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Fred Santino. Fred Santino left the Navy in 1968 as a second-class petty officer and completed a BS in business and an MS in engineering at Suffolk Northeastern and Western New England University. He became a project engineer for the U.S. Air Force, developing aircraft and communication systems at Hanscom Air Force Base and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In 1992, he began concurrently teaching college courses part-time for Western New England University. He retired from the Air Force in 2008 to teach at Boston University, where he continues to teach management and innovation. He is past president of the New England chapter, Old Antarctic Explorers Association. Fred has written a book, Milestones, Mishaps, and Management, the story of Antarctic aviation. And he will happily sell copies of his book today and gladly sign them. Please welcome Fred Santino.
This one. Ignore Linda.
Ignore Linda.
Thank you, Linda, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for letting me present my topic today. And I want to thank all the veterans who served and their families, and I especially want to remember those who didn't make it back. I was fortunate to have made it back when a lot of friends of mine didn't make it back, so I really want to remember those people. But as she said, I'll have books available after. I have a few of them. I also have a link if you want to buy them online. And all right, so let me get going on my topic. Let's see.
Sorry. There we go.
All right. All right, I want to present my experience first. When you think about the Antarctic, you might think about penguins and glaciers and, climate. No, that's not what I'm about. I'm about aviation, I might know a little bit about science. I don't know enough to talk about. I'm not your speaker for that. We have other speakers in our Antarctic group that do that, but my field is strictly aviation, so that's what I'll be talking about. And my experience, I was in the Antarctic twice. I was an Aircrewman, I was an Avionics Tech. I started as an electrician, I cross-trained as an Avionics Electronics Tech. I was also aircraft maintenance supervisor, and after the Antarctic, I served in carrier-on-board delivery, which is flying the mail and people on and off the carriers. I did that for a few years. And then following that, I got my advanced degrees and whatnot. I went halfway to a PhD, and I became a project engineer for the Air Force Material Command. I was there 29 years. I developed a few aircraft. My first was the AWACS aircraft. It's a big 707 with a saucer on the top, and a similar aircraft, the EC-130, E-4, the Doomsday plane, which is being redone right now, the C-17, which is being the principal plane in the Antarctic right now, and also the F-22, which is, I don't know what's happened to that. I've been teaching management primarily the last, since I retired. All right, as Linda mentioned, I'm past president of the Old Antarctic Explorers Association. I just want to mention that because that's principally how I kept up my interest in the Antarctic, and it was formed in 1999 when my former squadron was decommissioned. It was formed to keep the memory of the experiences of those who served in the Antarctic, and also not civilians too, not just military, but civilians who served down there. We have 1,000 members nationwide, and we have 200 members in New England alone, which is pretty good. And the only thing is we're getting older. And we all are every day. So we need, if anybody wants to join us, you don't have to be in the Antarctic to go to this. You could be an associate member if you've never been in the Antarctic. Our next meeting is March. All right. As Linda mentioned, I wrote this book, primarily therapy for myself, just to go over some of the things I did experience-wise and a near-death experience and whatnot. But I also wanted to do some research on the early days. Where's Jim? Deep Freeze 1. He was in Deep Freeze 1. I reckon 10 years before I was there. I really appreciated those guys who were before me and going back to the 20s and the 30s, you know, so I wanted to find out what it was all about, because it was bad enough when I was down there. I can't imagine 1955 or 56 on the ice. But that's one reason I wrote the book. The way I'm going to break down this presentation, talk a little bit about just some general background about Antarctica and aviation, and then I'm going to the early days from 1920s, up to the early 60s, through Admiral Byrd and all that. And then my experience, which is the mid-60s, 2 deployments, and then I'm going to talk about from those days up to the present day. So first thing I have to mention, I hate to have to do this all the time, but people say to me, the South Pole, you go to the South Pole. No, you're going to Antarctica. The South Pole is a point in the middle of the Antarctica. It's now a research station, but it's also a geographic point. Antarctica is not the South Pole. You can go to Antarctica without ever going to the South Pole. So I just want to mention that. It doesn't bother me when people say that, but I'm not going to correct you. Not my business. All right. It always amazed me how people were driven to go to the South Pole. This is before aviation. In 1911, Roald Amundsen and Robert Scott both competed to reach the South Pole. And both teams made it 862 miles by foot and dog sled from the coast all the way to the South Pole. However, Scott and his team perished on the way back, and Amundsen made it back, so he was credited as the hero, I guess, of the trip. They do call the South Pole Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station. And I was always impressed by Scott's dying words, which they found as he perished halfway back. Great God, this is an awful place. And I agree with him. I'll show you in a minute what I mean. All right. So you say, what the hell is the U.S. doing in Antarctica? Well, some of us say, I don't know why. Well, if you really want to know why. The National Science Foundation has an Antarctic program, USAP. They began collaborating in 1955 with 11 other nations to understand the Earth and the environment. And they've continued doing that since then. The reason is because Antarctica has such an extreme climate and isolation and a very untouched interior. Nobody's been there. Actually, nobody's been in that interior. So it's ideal to perform basic research. And they do basic research, not applied research, but basic. Basic research is something we probably wouldn't understand what they're doing in some cases. Applied research is more, you can get your arms around it. So the Antarctic program needed logistics to do their job. The Navy provided logistics for it. I'll explain that in a minute. Right now, that only lasted until 1998. Right now, the Air Force provides a long-range airlift to do their job. And the Antarctic program is contracted out, shorter air support and construction. That's all contracted out now. All right, here's an example of some of the basic research done by the Antarctic program. You notice you won't see climate change there. I never heard climate change mentioned when I was down there. And I never did. Maybe it didn't change then or something. But the thickness of the Antarctic ice sheet, why would you care? Well, if you're in that business, you do care. Antarctic wildlife and marine life, they did kind of general studies just to find if there was anything about it. They didn't have an agenda in mind, where they could come up with the next best whatever, you know, it was more of a basic research they could put in their database, I guess, whatever. They researched the ionosphere using a 21-mile long antenna. Where would you find a place to put a 21-mile long antenna except in the Antarctica? There's 21 miles beyond Byrd Station they could use. Now, the Antarctic program doesn't do much of the research themselves. They contract out to universities, providing grants. So the first thing noticeable, at least to me, was the weather, the rapid, unexpected weather changes. You have one day, you have a bad day. You have another bad day, you have a good day. So it's even within a day, it changes often. It's dangerously dry. It's so dry that it feels warmer than it really is. So you can possibly get frostbite if you don't watch out. I've been working on an aircraft sometimes 40 below zero, and it didn't feel that cold. But if you touch the metal, you're going to get frostbite in a minute. The winds get to be hurricane level, and sometimes you get these zero visibility whiteouts that often lasted for 2 or 3 days. So for 2 or 3 days, we'd be down. Everything would be shut down, no flying or anything like that. The only thing is, enlisted people like me would have to go out and check the aircraft. You know, the office didn't have to do that, but check the air, see if the aircraft blew away. What am I going to do? Bring it back? We dug holes in the ice, and we called them dead men, and we tied the aircraft there. We only had 1 or 2 almost blow away once. All right. 1928. 2 guys made their first flight to Antarctica. Now, they didn't go as far as the pole or anything. They went, you can see on the map here, South America's over here, Cape Horn, and they were at Deception Island, which is only a little bit distance from there. So it wasn't really that much of a feat, but they were in Antarctica. And from that Deception Island site, they surveyed 100,000 miles of previously uncharted area, which was amazing for those days. Ailson and Wilkins, they were Australians. Then we move on to Admiral Byrd, who was amazing. He had 3 expeditions, 1928 to 30. His Ford trimotor and his co-pilot flew over the South Pole, over it, not landing it. They also explored uncharted areas in their second expedition and more in the third expedition. They went up all the way to 1941, but then World War II was developing, so I suspect the Antarctica lost a little bit of references. Following World War II, the next biggest operation was Operation High Jump, which was, believe it or not, 13 ships, an aircraft carrier, 2 seaplane tenders, 25 airplanes, and almost 5,000 men. And the big thing they did was they had the U.S. Philippine Sea, an aircraft carrier, had 6 C-47s, DC-3s, and they had crated them onto the carrier. They couldn't fly onto the carrier, but they flew off the carrier and landed at Little America. That was Admiral Byrd's site there. And they had to stay there. They couldn't fly from there and land on the carrier. There was no place to take off anyway. But they successfully made that flight to Little America. However, tragedy, the first U.S. fatalities in Antarctica were PBM, which is a patrol bomber, is a seaplane, nicknamed George 1. They crashed, killing 3 Navy airmen. 6 of them survived. It was a terrible crash. One of them died from frostbite. What an awful way to go. And they couldn't find them for several days. And when they did find them, they were in really bad shape. But six people survived from that. Now, the U.S. Antarctic program took a little bit of a break there, and then in 55, 57, there was something called the International Geophysical Year, which there's not a lot of books written about it too. So the U.S. Antarctic program funded the U.S. Navy to provide logistics support. It was basically what I call a one belly button approach. Air squadron for the planes, the Seabees for construction, and the icebreakers and cargo ships. So they only had to deal with one admiral, get the whole thing done, and that's it. So those 3 functions, and that was in 55, they started that. Now, my old squadron, which was VX6, Air Devon 6, it was a combination Navy Marine Corps squadron, all volunteers, formed 1955 to provide air transport and search and rescue for Operation Deep Freeze 1, supposedly, but it lasted until 1998. These are the first aircraft they had. There's a really old aircraft. They had P-2V Neptunes, Albatross, the C-54 Skymaster, the old, I forget what they call it, helicopter, H-19, the Otter aircraft, and familiar Goonie Bird, DC-3. Yeah, they call it the Goonie Bird, and I've flown many of those. So the squadron flew 4 aircraft to McMurdo, the South Pole. McMurdo is on the coast. It's the closest point to New Zealand. They took off from Christchurch, New Zealand, and flew to McMurdo. And they made it 4 aircraft, 2 C-54s and 2 P-2Vs. Now, the C-54s have wheels. How do you land with wheels down the Antarctic? Well, the Seabees, where's the Seabee? Where is he? Had to scrape down the runway first before they could get there. So the Seabees had to go there before we would get there. Now, this is before my time anyway. There were, I think, 2 DC-3s and 2 seaplanes, got halfway to the ice, and because of crosswinds, they had to come back. You know, they've written a lot of things about that, but they got rid of the seaplanes. No more seaplanes, we don't need them anymore. But the DC-3s, even though they didn't make it to the ice, eventually they did make it there. So around the same time, they still hadn't gone to the South Pole yet. Nobody had landed at the South Pole ever. So the Seabees built South Pole Station. They constructed temporary quarters and facilities, but the aircraft couldn't land there because there was no place to land. So the Seabees had to have their equipment dropped in. Oh, how'd the Seabees get there? Well, they had to jump out of the airplanes. Who joins the Seabees to be a paratrooper? Well, I heard this from Charlie Bevilacqua, who used to be a Lexington member. He was a presenter here. He told me about that. I said, Charlie, you kidding me? You had to jump? Yeah, we had to jump out of the plane to get there. There's no other way to get there. We built the runways for them to land. And Charlie passed away in 2019, a good friend of mine. And Mount Bevilacqua in Antarctica was named after Charlie. And he deserved it too. He's an icon. I never served with him, but I remember him from our Antarctic group. So now they have a runway at the South Pole, a skiway. The VX6 made their first South Pole landing in October of '56. And Gus Shin, who I met a couple of years ago, 100 years old, he flew a C-47 named K. Sarah, which is in the National Aviation Museum right now, hung up. He landed at the South Pole. The temperature was minus 60 degrees. He couldn't shut off the airplane because he wouldn't be able to start it again. Minus 60, yeah, they say they left the airplane going, they walked around, they got back in it and get out, let's get out of here, guys. So the South Pole is 800 miles from McMurdo, where the main base was. All right, now, so after that, the VX6, my squadron, they flew personnel and cargo to build 4 more stations up to 1958. They used P-2Vs, which is it's really a submarine hunter. They used JATO to take off in a limited distance. They also used the Goonie Birds, the DC-3s, to transport cargo and small research teams to remote camps. How did they take off in a small distance? Well, they used JATO. JATO were these rocket bottles hung under the plane. And the JATOs fire, and the plane takes off like a rocket. You wouldn't believe how it feels in the plane when an old DC-3, you think it's going to crash. But the one problem with JATO is sometimes operator error. They fire the JATO bottles, and then before the actual plane had taken off, they released them. We had a couple of JATO bottles hit the wing of the plane and knock it down and knock a prop out. We had, I think, 3 crashes caused by JATO bottles coming off like that. All right, and this is way before my time, but I read about this. They had a plane called the Otter, the U-1B. It held about 10 passengers, about 8,000 pounds. It's small, like a bush plane. It's made by de Havilland of Canada. They use them up in the North Country. They could go almost 1,000 miles. They could operate from makeshift airfields. Well, our first aircraft lost, VX-6 of this group, was 1955, December. The order crashed on takeoff near McMurdo, no fatalities. However, there were 2 subsequent UNB crashes, and all 3 of these aircraft were unrepairable, but 2 VX-6 pilots were killed in the 3rd crash, unfortunately. Crashes was a thing those days. So not long after, another U-1B order crashed, and for some reason they couldn't locate it. The SOS didn't explain where they were or show where they were, so they were in a quandary. For a couple of days they couldn't find the plane, they couldn't find the survivors. They're out there in the middle of nowhere. They probably had survival equipment, but they're getting worried about them. So at that time, VX-6 had already returned to the States. They had already done their deployment to Antarctica. They'd gone back to Maryland. Well, they summoned a Neptune VX-6 all the way from Maryland to go to the Antarctic to search for the missing order. When what happened is they crashed en route in Venezuela in a jungle. And the aircraft was destroyed, but amazingly, everybody lived. So,
did they ever find the otter?
yeah, they did find the otter. It was in bad shape. Yeah, it was unrepairable. Yeah, not long after, there was another P-2V crashed. It was en route to McMurdo from Christchurch, New Zealand. And this is one of the problems. About halfway to McMurdo from Christchurch, McMurdo reported 0 visibility. Unbeknownst to the pilot didn't know that was going to happen, but all of a sudden you're halfway here, there's 0 visibility. What are you going to do? You can't go back. So they tried to land, but they hit a snowbank, and 4 of the crew were killed, 4 survived. Jim, that's one of your pictures, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Jim. Around the same time, the Navy asked for help from the Air Force. The Air Force had these huge Globemasters, which are about as big as a C-17 is now, I guess. The 8 C-124s went down there, and they made 65 12-hour flights to McMurdo with hundreds of passengers, tons of cargo, and they did airdrops. Unfortunately, one of the C-124 Globemasters crashed into a mountain near Hallett, which is almost on the way to McMurdo, killing 7 of the 13 on board, and the aircraft was a total loss. So there were so many crashes and rescues because VX-6, which is an air squadron, started their own pararescue team. So they had extra duty volunteers get trained as pararescue men, and they made many rescues. And this rescue team continued till the late 90s. And the last of the old aircraft to crash was another P-2V, November 61. It crashed on takeoff when the JATO firing ignited leaking fuel. That JATO was a problem. 5 of the crew were killed and 4 survived. Hence, VX-6 retired all the P-2Vs. That was the end of them. So why were there so many crashes? People ask me that. Well, first of all, they were new down the Antarctic. This is a new thing, going to the Antarctic and bringing scientists to different places. The scientists had great ambitions. Let's go here, let's go there. Some of those are unprecedented places. They were risky flights to very untouched areas. And the stations are what was going to be a station, had barely adequate landing facilities. The age and the hard usage of the aircraft was another thing. They were using aircraft which were, at that time, pretty old. They were some of the World War II aircraft. They were landing on unprepared surfaces with rough ice and everything. And another thing, the weather changed en route very quickly. You're on your way to someplace, weather's fine both ends, all of a sudden, sorry. Can you turn around? Maybe. If you can't turn around, you got to keep going, and you got to land at a whiteout. So many times they didn't make it. And landing at a whiteout is very difficult, even with navigates, because everything's white down there. At some point, the ground control will bring you to a point where you can supposedly see the ground. But down there, you can't really tell if it's the ground or not because it's all white. There was hurricane-level winds also. So For Deep Freeze 61, VX6 acquired 4 LC-130s, and boy, they were sorely needed because the old aircraft really had to be retired, all those crashes and whatnot. And they needed the long-range, heavy-load capability to resupply stations. They didn't have to do any airdrops anymore. They could land a C-130 and with pallets take out the supplies and whatnot. Previously, they were dropping stuff all over Antarctica. A lot of it was getting damaged and blown away. The mail, people never got their mail or anything. It was just an awful thing. So they cut back on airdrops at that time with the heavy 4 C-130s. Now, using those C-130s, this is just before my time, they had to do winter evacuations. What happened is, normally, the Navy would get out there in the summertime, Antarctic summer, from October through February. After that, the Antarctica is just completely isolated. It's pitch dark. I've never been down there in the wintertime, but I guess it's terrible. It's, temperatures have gone down way below 100, minus 100, and blowing snow everywhere, and plus it's pitch dark. So there was an ill Soviet scientist at Byrd Station, which is 800 miles from McMurdo, and somehow VX6 evacuated the scientist from it 61. Wow, that was the first winter evacuation they made. And then just before my time and just after my time, they had to go down again. They went down from Rhode Island to Christchurch, to the ice, and then back to whatever hospital. They evacuated 2 injured workers from McMurdo, but I don't know how they did it. They had to dig out those stations. They were buried with snow everywhere. And who wants to work in that kind of weather, too? Gee, you can't pay me enough. All right, so during that time, you say, well, it sounds like all they did was crash. No, they didn't. They also established 2 stations, one at Palmer Station, which is out on the tip of Antarctica, one at 8th Station. Now, I want to make the point, these are scientific stations. The U.S. military wasn't building any military bases down there. It was strictly scientific research. All we were doing as aviation part of the military was providing the cargo, the supplies, the people, taking there and building it, but it was strictly for science. There was no military usage down there whatsoever. Somebody asked me, were you guys trying to compete with the Russians? No, we could care less what the Russians were doing. Maybe they were doing military stuff, but we weren't. So that takes it up to my time, and I hope I can squeeze this in. All right, so spring 64, I completed 2 years of college. And I had 2 years in the Navy Reserves. Well, I was ready to go, you know. I said, I really don't want to do 2 other years of college. I'm sick of this. So I saw the Navy had a 2-year college graduate program for pilots. I want to be a pilot. So I went in active duty. Lo and behold, they never checked my vision that well when I was in the reserves, but the Navy on active duty, they said, oh no, you have to have perfect vision to be a single-seat aircraft pilot like an A4 Skyhawk. So I was disqualified. So they offered me a non-pilot commission, but I really didn't want to be a general officer. I wanted to be in aviation, so I turned it down. Plus I had to sign for 8 years to do that. I didn't want to do that. Who knows where it would have ended up. So I turned it down to just continue as a petty officer, an aircrewman. I already made plane captain in reserves, and that's what I wanted to do. So never thinking that I might be in some kind of jeopardy. I think give me a squadron where I could just coast, you know, that's it, or some ship. The Navy didn't think that way. So the squadron VX6 was deploying. They needed one more guy in my specialty, aviation electronics and electricity. But everybody in VX6 was a volunteer, handpicked from the Navy and the Marine Corps, psychologically screened. Here I arrive. I felt like a minor league player showing up to a championship team. It was like a kid from Lexington High getting on the Patriots or something. Really. And so it was a very elite, at that time, gung-ho squadron. You know, you hear about SEAL Team 6 and all. VX6 was that level those days. You'd see in the Navy publication, VX6. I never saw that. I never noticed it. I wasn't looking for it. All of a sudden, I'm in it. And so I didn't even have time to think, because this was August and they're going away in September. They sent me to aircrew training, which is pretty tough. Dilbert Dunker and the whole bit. And I passed. And they sent me to C-130 maintenance training, which is pretty good. So at least I had a job. So every fall, VX-6 would deploy from Quonset Point, Rhode Island, all the way to Christchurch through California and Hawaii and Pago. And then they'd go back to Rhode Island in February, and then redeploy the following September. So I'm in Christchurch, and it's a beautiful place. However, you don't see much of it. Here we are at Christchurch Airport. Now, the airport has a support base, which is run by the Navy. At that time, we had a hangar there, and we had all kinds of, amenities and whatnot. No hangars on the ice, so you want to fix the plane, you better do it here now. So from Christchurch, we flew on skis in a C-130. And we landed 3,100 miles, 8 hours in the C-130. And there's the strip, we call it the strip. There's two parts of McMurdo. There's the hill, which is up on a mountain, and there's the strip, which is the airstrip where the planes are. Unfortunately, I was based on the strip, which is the worst. Old Quonset huts and whatnot. And there's a volcano about 7 miles away, an active volcano. So I wasn't expecting, even though I was in the squadron and people were talking about the Antarctic, I wasn't expecting an unheated outhouse. Who would think of that? I mean, really. Yeah. Where else would you expect an unheated outhouse in the Antarctic, where it's got to be, below 20, below zero sometimes, and wind blowing, and well.
Do you stick to the sheet? To the seat?
Let's not talk about. I said, I may never eat again. This is what. So also, we had a separate building. These were plywood buildings. We had called the head, and we had sinks and a shower there, but you could only take one shower a week. And as you can see in this picture, I don't know if you can read it, it says, shower secured, no water. They ran out of water lots of times. Sometimes we had no drinking water because they made the water from melting snow. It was just unreliable as hell. Now, our quarters were just as bad. We had a canvas hut, which was, the canvas was stretched over these wooden arches, and the plywood was just placed on the snow, and the temperature in the hut was 20 degrees warmer on the top bunk than the bottom bunk.
Yeah.
Which one was better? I don't know. It's better, either you sweat or you freeze to death, so. But it wasn't good. I say life, well, things we took for granted were unavailable. We got to appreciate what we had. We had a galley, which was kind of a nice place to visit if you're in the cold, you're hungry, but they really lacked fresh food. They did the best they could, but everything was canned or dried or something. Every now and then we would get fresh eggs or fresh meat or something like that, but that wasn't very often, only if a plane went to New Zealand and back. Communications was impossible. You put on the radio, get nothing, absolutely nothing. Not even shortwave, you couldn't get a thing. And we worked 7 days, 12-hour days, except when you were flying, then you work more. So we didn't have a lot of time off, but I spent most of my time reading, writing. Occasionally, they have a 16mm movie showing the galley. There were, kind of classic movies or something that was around that time. And the only thing is we didn't have a dedicated projector operator. And sometimes we'd have 5 reels, and they weren't marked. So I remember one time, we were watching The Longest Day. It was the longest day for watching the movie because you put on the version, the first reel. Okay, where's the second reel? Okay, let's put this one on. Well, that's the 5th reel. This went on for finally, people left, It was bad. All right, now, how the hell did you cope? Well, the way I coped was I can be miserable. I could say, woe is me. I got pulled into a non-volunteer squadron. I'm the only I'm pulled into a volunteer squadron. I'm the only non-volunteer. Woe is me. No, I'm not going to do that. So I read somewhere happiness is a choice. So I found a way to be happy despite my being in a miserable place. I was also inspired by the people in the squadron. Their motto was courage, sacrifice, and devotion. I was kind of inspired by the people. They were really good people. I had worked Navy shore patrol before. I met the bad side of the Navy. People had discipline cases and stuff like that. These guys weren't like that. They were, solid citizens and whatnot. Inspired. People helped you. It was like a family. So I was inspired by that, really. It got me through a lot. Come on. All right, this is some pictures I took. This was probably the first day I was there. There was a sun. The sun's out all the time. However, there was a sunset about midnight the first day I was there. And I caught it going over the strip. The sun went down, then it come right back up again. And it never came up again until February. So, I mean, the dark wasn't dark again. All right, so he was always greeted the next morning. I looked out, and there was a penguin right in our flight line. It was just greeting me. And then I got a chance to fly over the volcano, which is kind of interesting, an active volcano. So here's what I was doing at first. LC-130, Hercules, crew member. We load cargo and take off, go someplace with JATO. Maintenance outside, no hangars, no, put a parachute over the airplane if you have time, and then put a preheater under there, maybe you could get by, but no hangars at all. There still isn't any hangars down there, as far as I know. We had a variety of things we did, too. My chief gave me an opportunity to be on a helicopter crew one day. The icebreaker East Wind's helicopter was out of commission. They were being repaired at McMurdo. So we got tasked to send a helicopter out to the East Wind with supplies and mail and whatnot. So I happened to be not scheduled for anything that day, so I was volunteered to be on the helicopter, which is kind of interesting. It was the first time I ever landed at sea, and it was interesting. Sometime later, this is maybe only a couple of weeks after I was there, I got picked for this crash and recovery team. This Otter aircraft, single engine, failed about 200 miles from McMurdo. No injuries, there was 6 on board. So we went out in a DC-3, to rescue the people, the survivors. We brought back the survivors and whatnot, and then they decided, that airplane isn't too bad. Maybe we should change the engine and fly it back. Oh, great idea. Who's going to do it? Okay, I'm on the committee here. I wouldn't have thought of it. So we had to bring out an engine. We went our second trip out there. We brought a big stand to put the engine on, and we had to live out there. We hardly slept out there. We pitched these tents, but we wanted to work and get the hell out of there. It was 40 below zero. It was supposed to be a 5-day trip. We were out there for 3 days because we worked constantly to get out of there. And then flew back the Otter, and it was successful. Like I say, variety was a thing. There was another aircraft we had. We had a Super Constellation, which the squadron had since 1958. They used it for transport between the U.S., New Zealand, and New Zealand to the ice. And that was the airliners of those days in the 60s. The airlines, TWA was still flying those Super Constellations those days, but the jets were coming out, replacing them. So the Super Constellation had no skis. It only landed on the ice runway, which is scraped down ice. And when I was at McMurdo, I got a chance to fly as a radio operator. That was a big deal for me because I was primarily an electrician. On these long flights to photo map unexplored areas, the photographers had cameras in the belly of the plane, and we'd fly out for, I think it was like 12 hours. We'd go out in some godforsaken areas. You look out and you say, why would anybody ever want to go there? But we took maps of them. Nobody had ever mapped them before. It was kind of interesting. Now, staying on the topic of the Constellation, I was on the line crew. I wasn't going to be on this flight, but as part of the line crew, we had 75 scientists, passengers, ready to take off for New Zealand from Antarctica, from McMurdo. But after we got the passengers on board and settled, there were whiteouts, and the whiteouts, or our whiteout, delayed the flight. So we had to get all the passengers off and get them to the galley, which we strung a rope from the airplane to the galley, and they had to walk. It was probably less than a quarter of a mile, holding this rope to the galley. So we got there, they're in the galley, we went back to the aircraft, whiteout's gone, let's get the people back on. So we got them back on again, another whiteout. So we got it back to the galley. This went on for 3 days. Finally, 3 days later, the aircraft took off. Oh my God, that was so good. I worked 3 days straight, no sleep, drinking coffee all the time, whatever. So I went back to the barracks and I fell asleep almost instantly. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I hear somebody screaming at me, "Santino, get up, we gotta move the camp. There's a big crack around the camp." I said, "Get out of here. You know I've been up for 3 days, get out of here, you know." He's, "No, I'm not kidding." So I guess I get up, I hear the helicopters above. There was a big crack all around the camp that they noticed. So we were on an ice shelf. We had to move, the idea was had to move the camp 10 miles away because the whole ice shelf was going out to sea. Well, being in the military, they said, "Oh, electrician, oh, gee, we could use you. How about taking those poles down?" Poles? I don't do poles, I do aircraft. So as I'm about to complain about that, one of the chiefs come over and he says, "Guess what, Santino? You're going back to New Zealand right now. Get packed." I was already packed anyway. I went up to what was the barracks, got my stuff, got on the plane, and we took off to New Zealand. I never had to stay to move the camp. I'm back in New Zealand. I'm reading the paper. The airfield goes out to sea in the Antarctic. So let's see. All right, so we were back to Rhode Island. That was the end of the season. Back to Rhode Island, then back to New Zealand. I didn't want to explain what we did in Rhode Island. So we're back in New Zealand that fall, and VX6 had just got a new constellation, Pegasus. The name of it was Pegasus. So we boarded Pegasus for our 12-hour McMurdo flight. I'm all excited. Gee, not brand new, but a fairly new plane. We're loading at Christchurch. 12-hour flight. I wasn't there. "Oh, I've been here before. I don't care. I've flown on." Not nervous at all. So we get about 5 hours on flight. Oh, we lost an engine. The pilot had to turn around. They couldn't make it to McMurdo with only 3 engines. And it was the roughest flight ever. And we got back to Christchurch Airport, and the other engine caught fire as we hit the ground. We had to jump out of the chute of the plane, and the airport had people all over the place cheering for us, and they'd been on the news, that plane's in trouble. That's the worst thing they could have done. So we worked on the plane. Unfortunately, I had to fly in that plane back to the ice. I worked on the engines myself, so I did the electrical work. I felt good about that. And the next try we made a couple days later, we went to the ice. We were successful. So I'm back working at McMurdo, and I had actually 3 jobs. By then I was a coordinator for strip operations when I was available for that and doing aircraft maintenance. I also flew as a crew member, C-130s and other aircraft. So one of the dumbest things I ever saw, which I wouldn't have admitted it then, I would have been criticized, but they wanted to build this station, it may be ambitious as it was, at the coldest place on the earth called Plateau Station. There wasn't anything there, but there was a point, and they were going to call it Plateau Station. They brought out these vans, and they made 6 trips to C-130 to drop these vans off, and that was going to be the quarters and working area for the people who were going to be out there. It was going to be like 8 people out there. So we flew out after the van delivery. We got there and the vans were already there. And the scientists got off the C-130. They walked around the plane. And I'll tell you, it was so high, at such a high altitude. There was so little oxygen. It was awful. So they walked around, and they came up to the aircraft command and said, "We want to go back." "What do you mean you want to go back?" "Yeah, we want to go back. We don't want to stay here." So they took the scientists back to McMurdo. I don't know if they got fired or quit or whatever. But
Smart.
they abandoned the station the year after. They never got anything out of it. It was too far out there. So they had these ambitious plans all the time. That's one reason we got so many crashes and things like that. This is kind of interesting to me. The Argentines had never been to the South Pole. They landed a C-47 DC-3 at the South Pole, and we had no idea. All of a sudden, I'm on the flight line, and there's a plane comes chugging up to it, chug, chug, chug. You know, it looked like it belonged in a museum someplace. It was so bad. They had trouble with the engine and landing gear, so we fixed it. They were there a couple of weeks, and they flew off. But it was just to show the idea. We helped other countries down there when we could. So I was assigned to one of the C-47s, number 832, part-time. I flew as a crew member, and I maintained the electronic systems and electrical systems. There we are maintaining it outside. And we flew to very remote areas. We flew scientists out to, you know, the most remote places you would ever want to be at. And one thing I want to mention, at that time, there were 9 DC-3 crashes before my time, 59 to 65. All of them were total losses of aircraft, no injuries. And the year after I was there, the DC-3s were retired. So I'm ready to go in this flight to Byrd Station with my crew. What happened is my CEO or whoever told me, don't go on the Byrd Station flight. You're going in a helicopter tomorrow. So they took off. They went to Byrd Station. I went in a helicopter instead. It was 800 miles to Byrd Station. So here I am in my helicopter the same day. Instead of my crew's flight at McMurdo Hills there. Come back to McMurdo about maybe 5 o'clock or so, and it was a complete whiteout. The pilot could barely land. It was the weather was so bad. So jumping out of the helicopter, you didn't just walk out like a gentleman. You had to jump out, you know. So I couldn't tell which of the land, which wasn't. So I slipped on the ice, hurt my back. I could hardly walk, and I limped over to the operations trailer, only to hear the bad news that everybody on 832, my crew, were killed in the crash, but they didn't know the details yet. So the line chief saw me limping, and he sent me to the doctor on the strip. So there was a cargo ship leaving the next day, put me on this cargo ship, which is a six-day cruise to New Zealand, and I was on there, and I could take showers on there, and there was a corpsman on board, so I was somewhat relief. If I stayed in the ice, I would have been no good. I couldn't take hot showers there, and I couldn't, get the medical attention or whatever. So by the time I got to New Zealand, my back was actually a little bit better. So I got back to Rhode Island, and I was transferred to my next assignment, flying off of the aircraft carrier in a C-1A. So I never heard the crash details. I never heard, why did it crash? How did it crash? Was it pilot error? Was it weather? Whatever. So I assumed responsibility. I said, I was survivor's guilt, why was I spared? Plus, being the electrician of the crew, what goes wrong in a plane? The engine didn't fall off, maybe, maybe the electrical system failed or something, I don't know. So I just kind of put that in the back of my head for the next 50 years. So after my time, I'll get back to that. After my time, VX6 made their first planned winter flight, Rhode Island to McMurdo. They went from Rhode Island to Christchurch to McMurdo, all planned, not to rescue anybody, just to show they could do it. In the middle of June '67, which is really terrible down there, just to prove a concept. And after my time, they got new helicopters. The aircraft we had were terrible. They got new helicopters. The Air Force started flying the C-141 Starlifter. They even flew the C-5A Galaxy, which may have seen it at air show around here, but they didn't fly them too often down there because they were so heavy. They were afraid they'd break the ice. The Super Constellation that I had flown, one of the two constellations they had crashed at McMurdo. This is in 1970, and it's still there. It's amazing. The stuff just stays down there. They crashed. About that time, the Navy decided, let's not have any more constellations. Let's use the C-141 because it takes less time to get there and it's more reliable or whatnot. It's much more cargo and things like that. So, all right. So my squadron had a lot of trouble. By the 70s, the aircraft were pretty beat up, taking a lot of abuse from rough landings and whatnot. And they were 1960 vintage anyway. They were probably built in 58 or something like that. But 71 and 73, they lost two of them. 71, 73, another one. But the first one crashed, poor visibility, fire destroyed the aircraft. But 71, JADO bottles came off, causing a crash. The 10-man crew was uninjured, but they had to stay in survival shelters for 3 days before anybody could rescue them. They were out in the middle of Antarctica for 3 days. I hope they had food and warm stuff or whatever. And the last one was 500 gallons of fuel caught fire, landing in a whiteout at the South Pole. So all these aircraft were destroyed, except for this number 321, which was in the ice for, let's see, come on. 321 was in the ice from 71 to 87. So it was buried in 33 feet of snow for 17 years before they decided to recover it. They previously thought it was impossible to recover, too costly, too dangerous. But they had good weather, and that allowed some recovery work. They found that the hydraulics and electronics still worked. There was air in the tires and fuel, and they dug it out and flew it out. But before you laugh, wait a minute. A plane went out with supplies for them, another one of our C-130s, and crashed. You can see it there. It flipped over, and two of our guys were killed in that. So another tragedy. So in 1998, the Navy ended their Antarctic support. They abandoned Antarctic support in deep freeze 98 to focus on war fighting. They needed the resources, and I just want to put some of the accomplishments they had. Transportation, construction, maintenance to make work and life possible on the ice. Flew scientists on unprecedented missions. Record-breaking flights, 4 winter medevacs, search and rescue of those in distress, and the extended operational capability under very extreme conditions. So the Air Force took over long-range air support with their C-17s and whatnot. The Antarctic program contracted shorter air support, construction, logistics, and maintenance, and the Coast Guard took over the icebreaker. So the Navy was completely out of Antarctica at that point. The final flight from Antarctica was defreeze 98. That was the last Navy flight on the ice. And 200,000 hours, 195,000 passengers, and 240 million pounds of cargo, whatever. That was it. So the 109th Airlift Wing out of Scotia, New York, took over the Antarctic C-130 business. They had newer C-130s than we had, and they had had some experience with ski operations in Greenland and whatnot, and they're still flying to Antarctica annually. However, the Air Force is smart. I'm not sure the Navy was that smart. If I talked to, maybe they were just adventurous, but they had no other thing but C-130s. They had no helicopters, no other smaller aircraft, no landings on unprepared surfaces, no winter rescues, no pararescue team, and no long-haul transport. That was done by C-141s. So they're just limited to that C-130 function on prepared surfaces, and that's it. So you're not going to get as much trouble as we did. However, this Dr. Jerry Nielsen, you may have seen this on TV, she developed breast cancer in March of 1998. Paul is physical isolated. Well, the Air Force decided that medevac was too risky. You know, even though the Navy went there 4 times, we can't do it. So I was kind of wonder about that, you know. So Dr. Jerry had to treat herself for 7 months while the medicine was airdropped from the C-141. Just flew out, dropped the medicine, went back, and finally they picked her up in October, which I think is kind of late anyway. And I met Dr. Jerry at one of our reunions, 206. Unfortunately, 3 years later, she died. So, nice lady, too. I actually worked on this airplane when I was working for the Air Force. Now they're using the C-17 Globemaster. October 99, they landed the first C-17 on the McMurdo Rice runway. It was replacing the C-141, and they brought mail and fresh supplies, and they could probably get by with just using this, except for the interior stuff. They can't go to the South Pole with it. They can only land at McMurdo, so they still need C-130s to do that. But it's a 5-hour flight from New Zealand versus, in our day, 12 hours at a C-121. The weather's so unpredictable down there. 5 hours is doable, but 12 hours isn't. So the National Science Foundation contracted our shorter flight support to Ken Borick Air and also Air Center Incorporated. But say, well, maybe they did better than we did. No, they didn't. They had 10 fatalities in between 07 and 13. So the Antarctica is still dangerous. Doesn't matter who flies down there. And because the Air Force wasn't doing medevacs, the Antarctic program hired Ken Borick Air Calgary to make 3 medevacs. They made 3 medevacs from the South Pole, April 2001, September 2003, and June 2016, flying these ski-equipped de Havilland Twin Otters. They went through South America and then through the British station Rothera and then to the South Pole. And they were glad that somebody could do it. I mean, really. The Air Force didn't want to do it. They didn't want any more tragedies. Also, I just threw in this slide because I want to show there was other countries down there: New Zealand, Australia, Argentina, Chile, France, Russia, and the UK. They all had various aircraft down there. We started it, but little by little, other countries got involved, and it's still happening. The Argentine Navy rescued 4 U.S. scientists and a contractor from a camp after the U.S. icebreaker couldn't reach them. So they're helping us now. All right, now, one of the disturbing things has been this air sightseeing flights. 1977, Qantas started flying Antarctic sightseeing flights from Sydney. And that was okay, but in 1979, Air New Zealand flew a DC-10 right into Mount Erebus, Antarctica, killing 237 passengers and 20 crew. The cause was identified as computer routing. They changed the computer routing the night before, and if the path was right into Mount Erebus. Yeah, I can't imagine. I couldn't imagine even being down there when that happened. Oh. So they suspended that for years, but now they've come back. They're doing that again. The latest thing is this Antarctic air adventure tourism. People ask, what's going on down there now? In fact, I saw this last week on television. They landed a 787 down there. Adventure Network Vancouver has been doing it since 1988. The Airbus takes tourists to a luxury camp in Queen Maud Land, which is right up on the coast. $65,000 for 5 days. Any volunteers? I wouldn't go there. You couldn't pay me. No.
But it's on an Airbus, though.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go there for 1,065. $1,060,000,000. I wouldn't go there. No. First of all, it's dangerous. It really is. It's not a good place. The weather changes so much, and they're lucky that the National Science Foundation is worried about the tourist volume getting in the way of research. There's always a threat of catastrophe in Antarctica, really. Someday there'll be, like they already had tragedies of some of the contractors down there. All right, now, going to get back to my crash in '66. So after I was directed to miss my crew's scheduled flight that crashed, naturally I had survivor's guilt. You know, I was the only one that survived. I was the only single guy in the crew. Everybody was married with kids. I was a single guy. and I'm going off in this helicopter flight, which I didn't think it was that important, to be with my crew. So I really had no basis to feel responsible, but I felt responsible that maybe I messed up some electrical system, or maybe the conditions I worked, it was too much, I just had a hunch that, I might have caused it. So anyway, I met a guy at the National Antarctic Reunion in Norwich. Somebody introduced me to this, Richard Anderson. I had met him before, but he was a radio man on another aircraft that was at Byrd Station at the same time. He was on the air listening to the crash, and he said that 832 crashed trying to land in a whiteout. So he said, we landed at Byrd just before the whiteout started. Then the whiteout came, and we were still listening on the air to see if the other aircraft made it, and they didn't make it. They crashed in a whiteout. So it was a big relief that it wasn't anything that I caused, and I felt bad that they crashed. Of course, they were guys, friends of mine, and I visited their grave, Arlington National Cemetery and whatnot, but I don't feel responsible anymore, which I did for a long time. It was just a big relief. So, all right. I mentioned Jado. Come on. This is a Jado takeoff. You see 130.
Amazing how we can laugh and smile with so many crashes. But Fred, you did a wonderful job. All right, it's time for the question and answer period. Bob will take that half of the room. I'll take this half, and
Who had the hand up first? Right here,
I think Bill did. Just please wait until we hand you the mic so that our Zoom audience can hear you and speak into the mic. All right, so Bill, you go, well, wait a minute, you take it first. Bill, you're next.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm most grateful.
You're welcome.
This is out of your area of expertise, but all of us here are concerned with global warming.
Yep.
Do you have any comments, non-technical, within your ability to answer on the subject of global warming as you saw it in your position with respect to Antarctica?
Well, down there, the only thing I saw was the first year I was there, the ice shelf broke off, which it wouldn't have broken off if it didn't warm up during the year. So I think every year the ice shelf broke off, but other than general information at the time, no, I spent some time with Mish Michaels, who's passed away since. She was a meteorologist, and she felt that I had a meeting with her, I don't know, a few years ago before she passed away, but she felt that there wasn't any warming down there at all. She felt it was still pretty cold. If you look at the temperatures right now, I have the temperature of Antarctica on my phone, and she didn't feel it was that, but there may be pockets of shelves, but you gotta keep an eye on it too, because things change, really. Yep.
I get the mic. How did these early air flights ever navigate? How did they know where to go once they're up in the air?
You've got me. They didn't have grid navigation those days, which we had, and they didn't have GPS those days. They did it strictly by dead reckoning and two air signals, like one station crossing another signal, and they figure where they were.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill, you're next. And then,
Thank you. Great talk. Very enjoyable.
hang on.
Thanks.
Bill, how do you do the mic?
Okay. Very enjoyable. And I'd like to mention that a copy of your book from my brother-in-law. He flew C-130s out of McGuire Air Force Base to Antarctica. And I remember the one thing he always talked about was the lack of a horizon.
Oh, yeah.
Everything was just white when you went down there. Now, he might have taken your advice because he got out of the Air Force immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments.
Somebody over there, you're next after that. Go ahead. Go.
I wanted to ask you about the, I wanted to ask you about the JATO on the P2Vs.
Yep.
You showed one picture where all these JATO bottles discs.
Well, the DC-3s had them on the bottom. The P2Vs had them on the side.
Well,
Yeah.
the P2Vs, I'm not sure what, there's some other designation after P2V.
Yeah.
When I came in, it just left my squadron in Hawaii. They had fixed,
Built-in JATO, yeah, no, those were the newer ones.
yes, the
The VX6 didn't have those, the old World War II ones that they had to hang JATO on.
The other question is, whose idea was to use that as a cargo plane? The wing goes right through the middle of the.
I know.
Where is the room?
I know, well, primarily they weren't using them for cargo as much as they were using them for small transports and photo mapping. They were doing photo mapping. And, yeah, the cargo was airdropped by not C-130s, but Globemasters or some of the C-54s and things like that. They'd fly out and airdrop it, things like that. The cargo wasn't being done by, unless it was small cargo.
Next question, Ivan.
Yeah, if I could just make a comment, it's not really a question. You'll hear from my accent that I'm a Brit. And in fact, I worked for the British Antarctic Survey for 3 years of my life. And I lived in part of the continent that we've seen the map of. And I just talk about global warming.
Get your mic on.
With my colleagues from down there, we have been talking about global warming for over 50 years. And it is important to realize not the whole of Antarctica is experiencing what we now see as global warming, but the bit that we call the Antarctic Peninsula, which is this line of mountains, which is really a southern extension of the Andes Mountains, that area is undergoing severe global warming currently. And the amount of damage that we're seeing to the life that you see on board, for instance, emperor penguins, they had massive loss of emperor penguins chicks this last year, but the whole water temperature is rising, and that means that a lot of the ice that is on the land, the glaciers, or even the shelf ice, is breaking up. And the British bases, which are in that area, have suffered very considerably. The one to the to the east side, I should say, of the Weddell Sea, massive chunks of shelf ice. There's one currently sitting up the north part of that peninsula. I think it's now afloat, but it is huge. And there are a lot of others about to come out. And so I find it fascinating, just listen. When I was down south, the only Americans I met came on the Coast Guard cutter, the icebreakers, the ones with the wind, east wind and so on. Yeah. And they came ashore, and of course our bases were tiny compared to the American bases. We often didn't have more than maybe a dozen people on a base. I traveled with dog teams and said, wow, you know, that's what Scott did. That's absolutely right. I flew in the Otters that he talks about, but with one engine. I went down 6 years ago. Again, we were setting up memorials of people, Brits who had lost their lives down there. And it's fascinating just going back, see the changes for me. And all I can say is it is a thing that is really moving, sadly, in the wrong direction. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much. I really enjoyed. I would love to have been. I never went to an American base, but you have these massive.
You didn't miss anything.
Well, you have these massive flat areas.
Yeah.
But I did talk to one of our pilots relatively recent on a Zoom, was an area that I know particularly well, which is shelf ice between Alexander Island and the mainland, that I knew very well. I never saw any water in my time there, which is early 60s. The pilot now, who was a female, said, and I looked at her movie. I was astounded. It's covered in water.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you do? How do you land? She said, well, the people on the ground have to find out areas that you can land our aircraft on. You can't do it anymore, just take anywhere and land.
I think that part of Antarctica towards South America is much different than the rest of Antarctica. It's much more exposed,
Very different.
Okay, Bob, next question.
Anyway, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for your service there, too.
Great.
You failed to mention the building of the runway.
Yeah, how'd you guys do it?
For Deep Freeze 2.
Yeah.
When we started building it, we plowed 2,000 feet by 250 feet wide. And then the powers to be had flooded. So we flooded it. And nobody thought about it. But putting all that water, it was like this. So they abandoned it.
Wow.
And they put a snow bench, and we had to start over. And now the pressure was on for the commander. They have it ready for Deep Freeze 2.
Wow.
Yeah, so I just wanted to look at that from the air. It was like landing in a trench.
I bet, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service down there, too. You know, I know you guys had it much rougher than I did, I'll tell you that. Because you were in the same squadron, right? Yeah.
I'm flank on.
So I'll ask a question from Zoom. Someone asked if you've seen the movie A Year on the Ice, which I think is about living in Antarctica. So did that movie get life in Antarctica right?
I haven't seen the movie. I will say it now that you mentioned it, if it's available somewhere.
Has anyone seen the movie A Year on the Ice?
I've heard of it.
I'll tell you, there's lots of stuff going on down there now. That wasn't the conditions that we had. So I don't think it's as bad as it was when we were there. You know, I think it's more livable. I think you can there's an ATM down there, there's phones, there's the internet. We didn't have the internet, you know, we didn't have snack bars, you know, really.
For $65,000.
Yeah, 65. Yeah. No. Yeah.
Okay.
Spend some candy bars.
I mean, it's different, but I wouldn't be, you know, it's not worth $65,000.
Hi, we met earlier. I'm Kathy Sullivan.
Sure.
When I was
Thank you for the book, by the way.
Kathy, would you like to hold this up?
Okay.
Yeah. Her father wrote a book on the first year of the Antarctic research, the IGY, the International Geophysics Year, which is the reason we started doing all this. And when Jim's people were down there, you know, the IGY, yep.
Yeah. When I was 3 years old, in 1957, my dad left my mom, my older sister, me, and our little baby brother, and went away for the whole holiday period in December. And he was the only news reporter who was allowed to go with the Navy down to, I guess it was Little America or someplace.
Yeah, they were using Little America then. Yeah.
And so my mom was really lonely, and she got an 8-track tape, and she recorded some Christmas greetings for my dad.
Wow.
And then it turned out that the New York Times TV reporter was also a ham radio operator. And so she brought the tape to him, and he found people to continually send the message all the way down, and he did hear it. So that's pretty cool. I don't know how they managed it, but it was pretty amazing.
We had a ham radio shack down there that I say we didn't have much communication. That was the only communication we had. If you wanted to call home, every now and then somebody would say, I reached a guy in Omaha or something. Anybody from Omaha, you know, something like that. And they had a guy in Walpole, Massachusetts. So I ran over the ham shack, and it was, hi, how are you, over? How are you, over? It was not very much of a conversation.
So I met Admiral Byrd when he was down there, and I wondered if he was still around when you...
I think he was gone by then. I think 57 he died.
Oh, really?
Or was it 62? I'm not sure, but it was...
My dad, he had piled some boxes in his little hut to keep it warmer. And Admiral Byrd came in one time and fell, and he got in trouble.
See, I would have loved to meet the guy, because he was amazing.
Well, thank you.
All right, we have time maybe for one more question. So who's going to ask the final question?
How much is your book?
$20.
Good question. The question was, how much is the book? The book is $20.
I have 8 of them. And I have also have flyers, if you don't have any money, I don't want to buy it online.
And because it's large book, there's only 8 copies of the book. Get them while you can.
I can only get so many at a time, you know, so.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Then please join me, everybody, in giving a big hand to Fred Santino.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. It was wonderful. Wonderful. I just love the humor that you managed to interject into all that. So, once again, we conclude another wonderful session of the Lexington Veterans. Susan, did you have another Zoom question?
No, I was just going to shut it off.
Okay, this concludes our presentation. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Enjoy your holiday season, and we shall see you in the new year. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Linda.